Okay, this is part two on the myth of creation. And if you haven't seen part one yet, you can go to the very end of this, like the last 25 seconds, and it should be in your top right hand corner. And then part three, once it comes out, will be in the bottom right hand corner. And whenever I get the other ones done, of course, each one will have it on there, and then you can go back to number one, and it'll have at the end of it part two and three, and on two it'll have one and three, so on. And at the end of this, I'm gonna have another reveal. I believe it takes all of this knowledge that I'm going to show you in these three to end up adding up to what I can reveal to you in part four. And if I don't give you enough information, it's just like me going and things, like I do a lot, and you don't even know what I'm talking about. So perhaps after I get through with this, it will give you a better firm grasp of what we're speaking of. Today we're talking about more of the Mesopotamian influence or Sumerian influence on the Bible and other religions too at the same time. Now, the structure of the Bible, what we'll look at is in creation myth here. The creation narrative is made up of two stories roughly equivalent to the first two chapters of the book of Genesis. There are no chapter divisions in the original Hebrew text. It just isn't a contiguous thing. It keeps going. That scroll they originally had just keeps going. And there originally are meant to be headers, and it's the first opening line of each one of the phrases, and that's how you pick out each spot. But quite often it's been absorbed into the Bible, and it ends up being the first phrase of a new book or chapter, or even just, one of the verses, and it continues from there. But I digress. The first account, 1.1 through 2.3, employs a repetitious structure of divine fiat and fulfillment. Then the statement, and there was evening and there was morning on the X day for each of the 6 days of creation. This story that we're going with. Now, in each of these first 3 days, there's an act of division. Day 1 divides the dark from the light. Day 2, the waters from above and the waters from below, because there's this firmament thing that we'll talk about later. And day 3, from the sea, from the land. In each of the next 3 days, these divisions get populated. Day 4 populates the darkness and light with the sun, moon, and the stars. Day 5 populates seas and skies with fish and fowl. And finally, land-based creatures populate the land with mankind also. Now, consistency was evidently not seen as essential to storytelling in ancient Near Eastern literature. There have been Bible scholars who have looked over the thing, and there are inconsistencies. The problem that they run into is, of course, there's quite often at least two stories of the same happening, like as in Samuel, and then you find it in Kings, or things like that in the Old Testament. Or in the New Testament, they have each one of the books of the apostles, Matthew and John, Mark, and so on. And these in Luke, they each give a slight variation on a theme that shows you inconsistency. Now, the overlapping stories of Genesis 1 and 2 are contradictory but also complementary, with the first, the priestly source, what we call the P source, is concerned with the creation of the entire cosmos, and with the second, the Yahweh source, what we call the J source, focuses on the moral agent and cultivator of his environment, on man. Now, there's also an E source, which is an Exodus source that they realize is separate from these two. And there's also two other sources they found that are interjected into the Bible, and a few other places that are just rampant with some phrasing that are shoved in also, that they can find that they can't quite pin to either one of these, although they try to pin it to as few as possible, of course. Now, the high regimented 7-day narrative of Genesis 1 features an omnipotent God who creates a godlike humanity, while the 1-day creation of Genesis 2 uses a simple linear narrative and a God who can fail as well as succeed, and humanity which is not godlike, but is punished for acts which could lead to their becoming somewhat godlike. Now they've thrown these two together, though, here on this concept. One where you're just meant to take over the world and be like a god, like it says, and that Adam's supposed to be over everything. But then there's this other story where, oh, you screwed up, and now you'll have to rise back to that point again. And this, of course, tries to lead mankind in a great upward swing, which has really helped mankind quite a bit. But a lot of these stories in the Bible have seemed to be quite archaic, and there's a lot of problems with embracing some of the stories they have in there. But I digress again, of course. Together, this combination of parallel character and contrasting profile point to the different origin of materials in Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, however, elegantly now they've been stuck together or combined or woven in together. Now the primary accounts on each chapter are joined by a literary bridge. At Genesis 2:4, these are the generations of the heavens and the earth, and when they were created. Now this echoes the first line of Genesis 1, where in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and is reversed in the next phrase, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens. This verse is one of 10 what they call generations or toledah phrases used throughout Genesis, which provide a literary structure to the book. It's something like typology. If you've seen my other videos about this, typology is where they continue to do something over and over again, like Abraham comes across the Euphrates into a new land in 40 days and does something and da-da-da, and then plants a tree that does this, and so on. And then you have Moses, where he takes the people that have been in captivity for 400 years, and he takes them across the desert, and they wander in the desert for 40 years. And, so there's all this 4 and 40 things, and of course, that's a generation in the Bible and a symbolic number that they keep putting in there. Well, while in Sumeria, they kind of had a symbolic 6 number on it, and everything they have is based on hexadecimal. All their mathematics and numbers is 6 and 60. It's why we have 12 hours in a day and 12 in a night and 24 in the whole day and 60 seconds in a minute, and it's the delineation of time that we carry. It's still there today, 360 degrees in a circle, and 1 degree of inclination that the sun goes up and down through summer solstice to winter solstice. It moves 1 degree per day. This is their lineation of it. It's quite amazing they had all this back then, and now they found they had trigonometry that's much easier to do than the complex mathematic equation that we currently use, and it seems to be a little bit more accurate, although you have to think on a base 6 term, which is hexadecimal, which ironically is what computers kind of run on. So very odd there, but anyhow, there's a lot to that, but I'm going to try to get through this. This is my 3rd attempt on it, and last time I had a couple of things in a video with a guy singing, which I'll try to add down in the bottom and so on, and it got over 30 minutes. I'm trying to keep these 10-15 minutes, maybe tops, because I think that I lose people after that point on going through things, and I don't have enough punch in there, and I pretty much have to throw a bunch of fireworks at you to keep your attention. Anyhow, let's go on with this. So this combination thing, this parallels that keep happening again, this is a type of literary creation that they've used, that people have known for a long time, that they use this symbology basically that shows you they have a connection, and Jacob ends up doing the same thing in 40 days and going across the Jordan, and then Jesus does the same thing, except for his water experience is baptized, but then 40 days in the wilderness. It's all an attachment all to this concept of this Moses type prototype type situation that is split back through everybody, and that pretty much is in a large portion of the hierarchy. But now when we look at comparative mythology, it provides historical and cross-cultural perspectives for Jewish mythology. Both sources behind the Genesis creation narrative borrowed themselves the themes from Mesopotamian mythology, but adapted them to their belief in one God, establishing a monotheistic creation in opposition to the polytheistic creation myth of ancient Israel's neighbors. So everybody around them pretty much had this. But of course, Abraham came from Ur, and so this seed of them coming over and being trapped in between, living out nomadic in the desert, and then finally coming into Canaanite land and taking it by force. But we're not going to go into that line of it at this point. But they had the belief system, and you can see that they have a hate towards Egypt, and they have a hate towards Mesopotamia or Sumeria, which they constantly refer to as like Babylon. And that it's, you know, turned into all of this, and they kind of are scorning it, but in that way it's odd. But they take the same myths that are creation myths that they have and weave them into being their creation myth and say it's more like this. But in doing so, they pick and choose everything down the line. It's almost like, well, you've heard it said so and so, well, blah blah blah, and you've heard they say so and so, well, blah blah blah. And that's how they built their thing, kind of off of it. And it shows you where they get it from, and concepts all the way down to Noah in the boat with Utnapishtim, and letting loose doves and coming back with dirty feet, and the whole story that goes with it. Anyhow, so Genesis 1 through 11 as a whole is imbued with Mesopotamian myths. Genesis 1 bears striking differences and striking similarities to Babylon's national creation myth, the Enuma Elish, which means when on high. On the side of similarities, both began from a stage of chaotic waters before anything's created. In both, a fixed dome-shaped firmament provides these waters and divides them from the habitable earth and gives us air to breathe and the breath of life. And both conclude with the creation of a human called a man, or Adam, or Adamu, or Adapa, and in the building of a temple for the god. And this temple is the entire cosmos, which is usually a tent. On the side of contrast, Genesis 1 is monotheistic, where it tries to say it's just one God. It makes no attempt to account for the origins of that God at all. And there's no trace of the resistance to the reduction of chaos to order, like is usually found in a lot of the other people's myth, or what they call theomachy, which is literally like God fighting. All of which mark the Mesopotamian creation accounts, and of course also Greek and Roman accounts where there was Titans and it breaks its way down. They don't do that in here. It's the one thing that tries to set it apart and different. Now, Genesis 1 bears similarities to the Baal cycle, which is Israel's Ugaritic neighbor. And we talked about how the Baal cycle has El in it. And in the last video, if you watch the end of that, the lady there quite well equates how El and Baal, and of course Baal worships in the Bible and everything off of it. And the other one they go to is not really Yahweh, but it's El. And they flip-flop from that. And then El Shaddai is the goddess of the two breasts, for Shad means breasts. This is Asherah, his wife. Or people say that it turned into a knot when she was a goddess of love, but then she became the goddess of war. Now this, of course, is the same thing as Diana, which is the same thing as Inanna of the Sumerians. So it all kind of goes through there. You have this Ishtar, Asherah, Astera, and Astera is like a star, Astera, and this is Venus, that is Diana. And so this all goes together, and whenever planets were gods, and El, of course, is Saturn, and Baal is Jupiter, and he's the storm god. And here you see the Babylonian version is the same thing, where he's got lightning bolts and he fights this primordial god of chaos, Tiamat, and then he uses half of its body to prop up the atmosphere. Now, this is in the later mythos, but in the original concept of Sumerians, it's a little bit different. Whenever we look at Sumerians, we're quite often looking at Akkadians and calling it Sumerian, and then Babylonian later. But there is an ancient Sumerian that goes before this, and they tell you stories about way back when. Their firmament's a little different. It's more looked at like ice. There's a story where they see the earth from up on high, and it's white on top, white on bottom, and blue and brown and green in the middle. And that sounds like land and water, and ice on top, ice on bottom. And surely coming out of the last ice age, even now when you look at it, it's got a little ice cap and an ice bottom on it. And that was the firmament above and the firmament below. But then it gets chained into this idea where we're actually in a dome. We're actually in something that's like a, well, it's the flat earth model, for God's sakes, with a snow globe type appearance, where we have this dome over us, and the glass isn't that great made back then. It's got a lot of bubbles in it. And so they believe that the Milky Way is just a strand of bubbles. But somehow this ball that we're in, the glass keeps slowly spinning, because Atlas, that's holding it under the bottom, is slowly trying to keep grip on it, and he's slowly pushing. It's going around and around, and that makes the bubbles slowly go through the nighttime. That we're not spinning at all and causing this, and our day and night is not us facing and not facing the sun, but the sun's flying over us. The sun and the moon are also inside of this dome, so in our atmosphere, and they're about the same size, which it seems that way whenever they eclipse each other. But we know now that one of them's 93 million miles away. Well, it's 400 times away than the moon is, but it's 400 times bigger, but then that far away, so it's exactly the same size, if you follow me in that perspective form. God, this is going long again, isn't it? The Enuma Elish has left traces on Genesis 2 also. Both begin with a series of statements of what did not exist at the moment when creation began. The Enuma Elish has sprung in the sea as a point where creation begins, paralleling the spring on the land. And down in the comments, I'll try to leave where it shows you the starting of the Enuma Elish, and it tells you, like, before the land was ever cultivated, before bread was ever eaten, and these things. It's sung by a guy. It's really only the first tablet of like 12 that make it up in the first little story that they have, and he only sings the first tablet. It's 3 or 4 minutes, but I didn't want to explain it and then do it. That added 6 minutes to the video last time. I just wasted a minute talking about it. As a spring in the sea, which creation begins, paralleling the spring on the land in Genesis 2, is notable for being a dry creation story. In Genesis 2:6, that watered the whole face of the ground in both myths. Yahweh is God's first to create, Yahweh and the gods first create a man to serve them, then animals and vegetation. I have to mention too that the word they use in the Bible is Elohim, and this is the council of gods, and it again points towards El, who is Saturn or Kronos, and this is, of course, the belief system over there that they have that created everything, that took over the world after the giant Titan situation, which could be talking about dinosaurs and different ages of mankind. And this all really has a lot to do with the same stories, is one thing that I am finally getting at here, but let me continue through here. At the same time as with Genesis 1, the Jewish version has drastically changed its Babylonian model. Eve, for example, seems to fill the role of a mother goddess, especially when in Genesis 4:1 she says that she has created a man with Yahweh. Now, but she is not a divine being like her Babylonian counterpart. Now, in the Sumerian concept, Enki makes women, and he has hybrids off of them. This is really expounded upon in the Sitchin work, which I don't agree totally with, and I won't even touch upon it here necessarily. But this is where she created a man with Yahweh, right? And this is and so it's by God she did it. But then again, that also reads a little differently, doesn't it? Now, Genesis 2 has close parallels with a second Mesopotamian myth called the Atrahasis epic. It parallels that, in fact, extend through Genesis 2 through 11, from the creation to the flood and its aftermath. The two share numerous plot details. The divine garden and the role of the first man in the garden, the creation of man from a mixture of clay or mud in the earth or the afar, and divine substance, the chance of immortality, the breath of life. Now, in the Gilgamesh epic, they have a chance of immortality, or at least getting like the elixir of life that makes you young again, and the snake eats it. And in the story, that's what makes the snake somewhat immortal. Back then, there was a lot of people that were snake worshippers, and the snake, as it leaves, it sheds itself, and instead of being grayish skinned, is all brand new again. And so this is the story of how, oh man, he got my stuff, because he's all brand new again, and I missed out, and how mankind missed out there. The Adapa version is where he goes up into heaven, and Enki tells him, don't eat of the foods, because he might trick you and kill you, and then you'll be in heaven forever and you won't be able to come back. And so he decides not to eat their foods, which was a mistake, because An actually liked him a lot, and he was trying to give him the elixir of life and make him into a demigod, and he refused it very humbly. But it's almost looked at as like An was like, well, whatever. Anyhow, this parallels each other quite a bit, though. They share these plot details. They have similar overall themes, and so you can see how one of them is taken from the other. And of course, the Bible is written much later. Everybody says, well, oh, they passed it down, or they whatever. Well, this is a story they're passing down and changing a little bit when they're no longer part of those people. Then they make the story where they're talking crap about those people, but kind of using those people's story. It's what I'm getting at here. Let's look at more of this, though. So, the overall theme, though, is the gradual clarification of man's relationship with the gods and the animals. And that's what gods do, is they set forth things, they give you paths, gods tell you what to do. It's almost like your sacred animal type situation, stuff like that. Whenever you were born, you were said to be under certain gods, almost like a zodiac situation, and therefore you would follow what goes on there, and that just kind of made the world go around. Well, now we go at it a different total way, although you still see zodiac people around and things like that. Now, the Garden of Eden story is compared to the Sumerian myth, in which the goddess Ninharsag, which is Lady of the Mountains, created a beautiful garden full of lush vegetation and fruit trees called Edenu, or Eden, and in an area called Dilmun. Now, Edenu is basically your biblical Eden. It's a place name featured in the Gudea cylinders as a watercourse from which plaster is taken to build a temple for Ningirsu. It's like a clay plaster. So here we have that clay idea and touching it again. And also Eden itself is the fertile plain that itself is the Sumerian growing lands that's all been irrigated out. And now you can look on Google Earth and down on maps, and you can see where there's all these grids that are out there, and how the water used to run into them and down and fertilize the whole area, but it no longer really does so unless it floods out like crazy, and then it still doesn't follow the water courses because they're filled in. Now, Dilmun also is down at the very end of the Tigris and Euphrates, where they come out and down near the delta. But back before the last ice age ended, it would have gone out much further. And it's believed that Dilmun is kind of the area between there and India. that at one time contained a lot of these Proto-Indo-Europeans. Now, the Sumerian earthly paradise is kind of seen as being in Dilmun. You look at Inky Tales and things, it talks about it a lot. It's a place where the Sumerians believed to exist to the east of their own land, beyond the sea. Ninharsag charged Inky, her lover and half-brother, with controlling the wild animals and tending the garden. But Inky became curious about the garden where she had new herbs growing, and his assistant Adapa selected 7 plants, 8 in one version of the tale, and offered them to Inky, who ate them. This enraged Ninharsag, and she caused Inky to fall ill, or it caused him to fall ill by eating all these weird herbs at once. Now Inky felt pain in his ribs, which is a pun in Sumerian, as the word T means ribs, but it also means life. Now the other deities persuaded Ninharsag to relent, and so Ninharsag then created a new goddess, or 7 or 8 separate minor deities under that goddess, to heal his 7 or 8 ailing organs, including his rib. Now the major goddess was named Nin-Ti, and it's composed of Nin, which means lady, as in Ninharsag, and Ti, which means rib, and would be translated as both Lady of the Living and Lady of the Rib. And to cure Inky, some scholars suggest that this served as the basis for the story of Eve as the mother of life and Lady of the Rib, created from Adam's rib in the book of Genesis. You know, it's hard to reconcile that story that you look at in the Bible, because if you're looking at it just from an outward viewpoint, what you have is a woman that grows from a rib and eats from a magic tree because a talking snake told her to. And that just really doesn't fit with logic. You try to find logic and find inside the Bible, and some of these things you just can't rationalize that part. But there's more to where that comes from, and I'll get to that. Now, there's also creation by word and creation by combat. Now, the narratives in Genesis 1 and 2 not only are the creation myths in ancient Israel, and the complete biblical evidence suggests that 2 contrasting models. The first is the Logos, meaning the speech model, where Supreme God speaks into action or speaks dormant matter into existence, like let there be. And the second is the agon, meaning struggle or combat model. Now this is also, agon is found in the word agony. It's also in protagonists, and meaning like struggle or combat, in which it's a Greek term, in which it's a God's victory in battle over the monsters of the sea that mark his sovereignty and might. Indeed, all the people of this area have this same thing. The Apep snake and the idea of killing off the crocodile and so on in Egypt. And of course, they have the same idea in the Canaanite lands, where they kill the sea god Yam, which is talked about at the end of the last video. And the death god Mot, which doesn't get killed off by Yahweh here apparently. So he leaves it to Rome. Anyhow, these are examples of the Agon mythology, where you find them in Psalm 74 and Isaiah 51, recalling a Canaanite myth in which God creates the world by vanquishing the water deities, where he says, "Awake, awake, it was you that hacked Rahab into pieces, that pierced the dragon. It was you that dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, that made the abysses of the sea, and the road redeemed might walk." There's also another story in the Bible where they have a story of Leviathan, and they tell you that he kills Leviathan and he feeds it to the people of the wilderness. And this is the same concept, same story. Dragons too. It's another story in the Bible where there's dragons listed in there. It's kind of thrown out of the Bible now. It's in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they go to see a cave and baby Jesus is there, and there's dragons that show up, and Jesus comes down and just looks at them, and they all rebuke and just act all and leave everybody alone and run off. Isn't that wonderful? The cosmos created in Genesis 1 bears a striking resemblance to the tabernacle in Exodus 35:40, which was the prototype of the temple in Jerusalem and the focus of priestly worship of Yahweh, where he was supposed to be in a tent called a tabernacle. And that's where you find Asherah. She's listed as being the pole in the tabernacle. And indeed, Asherah was a pole that got cut down in a few places in the biblical stories where they knocked it down and got rid of Asherah, and then God says there's no one beside him, like pretty much dissing his wife, who turns into the whore of Babylon, who used to be the queen of heaven. Now, for this reason, and because other Middle Eastern creation stories also climax with the construction of a temple or a house for a creator god, as in the story I showed you at the end of the last one, you really need to watch that if you're missing it. Genesis 1 can be interpreted as a description of the construction of the cosmos as God's house, for which the temple in Jerusalem served as the earthly representative, like the blanket over them, like Mithra's cape that makes up the sky, like the picture that you see in the Sistine Chapel where God has the big cape coming out and he's about to form creation, or when he's doing the sun and the moon. And what's funny is the guy on the left of him there is actually mooning God, but he can't see it because his arm's blocking. The word bara is translated as created in English, but the concept it embodies was not the same as the modern term. In the world of the ancient Near East, the gods demonstrated their power over the world not by creating matter, but by fixing destinies, the me's of creation. So that the essence of the bara, which God performs in Genesis, concerns bringing heaven and earth, a set phrase meaning everything, into existence by organizing and assigning roles and functions. He does that with Adam and Eve and tells them what they're going to do and all that. And anyhow, the use of numbers in ancient texts was often numerological rather than factual. That is, the numbers were used because they held some symbolic value to the author. The number 7 devoting divine completion. Actually, in Sumerian, it's 6, and then the 7th is the divine completion. You see how that comes from there? That they only have 6. There's 6 days of creation, and then there's a rest. This is how they got the 6 in Sumerian that they say of, where Enki came, started land off, kills a snake by stepping on its head, which is mentioned in Genesis as he will bite your heel and you will stomp on his head, and that he didn't know what it was. Showed up in the swampy area, but separated from that, got up into the land, did everything, saw the animals and so on, and it follows this exact same ratio of what he had done in 6 days. Then he rested, and upon completion, then started his works. So it parallels it quite a bit. So this bara, which God performs in Genesis, concerns bringing heaven and earth, or everything into existence. And they use these numbers, 7s and 6s and things like that. Now, Genesis 1 consists of 7 words, verse 1.2 of 14, and then 2:1 has 35 words, or 5 times 7. Elohim is mentioned 35 times, heaven or firmament, and earth 21 times each, and the phrases, and it was so, and God saw it was good, occur 7 times each. And so there's this repetition that goes on. Now that's something that you also take out of Sumerians, where they say things over and over again sometimes. And in fact, if they say it twice back to back, you know that they really mean it. They'll tell you it's far away, far, far away. Then they don't mean it was like here, or it was like a couple of days, but it was like, man. Okay, you know, it's exponential, if you will. Now, procreation, Genesis 1-2. It tells you, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, although the opening phrases of Genesis 1:1 is commonly translated in English as above, The Hebrew is a little bit ambiguous and can be translated at least three ways. You could say as a statement that the cosmos had an absolute beginning, so in the beginning God created heaven and the earth. As a statement describing the condition of the world when God began creating, so when in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth was untamed and shapeless, and are essentially similar to the second version, but taking all of Genesis 1.2 as background information. When in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth being untamed and shapeless, God said, "Let there be light." So you have a blending. Now this is something we're doing mentally that isn't necessarily there, but it's intended for you to eventually have these two stories and to make your own blend off of it. And it's kind of like whenever I read a Stephen King novel and you do, and I know the cottage we're talking about, and I've got a picture of it in my mind, and you have a different one in your mind, and if we don't pick it apart, we both believe we're talking in the same thing, but whenever you really pick it apart, our stories are different than each other, and no, she didn't even look like that, and how dare you say she was wearing a red dress, and it would just go from there. But anyhow, so there's this fixing destinies. Now the second seems to be the meaning intended by the original priestly author. The verb bara is used only of God, so people do not engage in bara, like when they create people. It's not that. It concerns the assignment of roles, as in the creation of the first people as male and female, i.e. he allots them their sexes or assigns their roles. In other words, the power of God is being shown not by the creation of matter, but by fixing its destinies. The heavens and earth is a set phrase. Now, people don't look at that. That last statement was important. People don't look at it that way, that really God's just saying that this is what you do. And he tells the woman what's going to happen from there on because she's pregnant, and you're going to experience pain and so on. And everybody goes, oh, this is an original sin and all that. And they go, no. He's just telling her that when she has kids, she's going to have pain. Dear. And it's a simple thing. He's going to have to till the ground and do things. Manna's not just going to fall out of heaven. It's not going to happen. So, the heavens and the earth is a set phrase meaning everything, i.e. the cosmos or the universe. But nobody knew about it back then, so we're adapting now, aren't we? Now this was made up of three levels: the habitable earth, the middle, and the heavens above, and an underworld below, all surrounded by a watery ocean of chaos as the Babylonian Tiamat, or Absu. Now the earth itself was a flat disk surrounded by mountains or a sea. Above it was the firmament, a transparent but solid dome resting on the mountains, allowing men to see the blue of the waters above, with the light that was going on like the blue of the ocean, but at nighttime would become dark, like trying to look into the dark ocean. Now this firmament above, in your biblical idea, has windows to allow the rain to enter, and containing the sun and moon and stars inside of it. The waters extend below the earth, which rested on pillars sunk in the waters, and in the underworld was Sheol, the abode of the dead. Now you see this concept though in a lot of people, and of course people go into the ground whenever they're dead, and they would say they're there, but is this actually the other side of the world that people used to be on somehow, and they're saying, well, that's where everybody died at, so that's the land of the dead? Or the underworld that they talked about in ancient Sumerians was the fact that there was the northern half of the hemisphere. They lived right there near the equator, or what they call the belly button of the earth, which is echoed in Greek and also in Egypt, of having this concept of being at the equator or the belly button of the earth, and then using that idea to say that above and below, and as above, so below, like it keeps going and it gets colder and colder and there's ice, and down there, what does it do? Well, it keeps going and colder and colder and it's ice. But people don't look at it on this concept, and they look back at it and they go, they didn't know that. because people after that didn't act like they knew it. And you're like, well, it seems like they kind of knew a lot more than people give credit for. Here's a tablet that shows you trigonometry and advanced math that go up into 6 digits. Anyhow, I'm about through with this one. I know it's getting long. Where are we at here? Oh my God, 40 minutes long. I am sorry, people, but I'm not even quite through with this, and it's at an important point, but I do want to make sure that I get your full attention whenever we're doing this, so I'm going to try to finish it off just a second here. The opening of Genesis 1 continues, and the earth was formless and void. The phrase formless and void is a translation of the Hebrew tohu wabohu. Now, chaos, the condition that bara, ordering, remedies. In other words, bara helped remedy this chaos that's going on. Tohu by itself means emptiness or futility. So that's whenever the world was dark and void, right? So the phrase appears also in Jeremiah 4:23, where the prophet warns Israel that the rebellion against God will lead to the return of darkness and chaos, or tohu and bohu, as if the earth had been uncreated. Now, the interesting thing there that they don't show you in this that I'm going to tell you is that tohu is Tiamat and bohu is Bahamut. And in the original Sumerian tales, 2 dragons got into a giant fight. The earth ran into another planet, which ironically our scientists say this happened and imparted us with our moon that we got somehow strangely here. And their tale, she disintegrated and ended up becoming the Milky Way and the asteroid belt that's out there. And there is one missing where the planet would have been, or a planet would have been, ironically too. So it shows you there may be some truth as we get into science about this actual aspect here of it. But tohu and bohu is really more seeing that concept. And then if tohu and bohu come back, that it would cause Earth to be uncreated. In other words, if we get hit by another giant meteor, it would uncreate the Earth. That would be the chaos dragon that would come. Now, these chaos dragons are comets and things like that people see in meteorites, which are falling stars, right? These stars. We know now if a sun fell to Earth, it would be so much huger than the Earth. It wouldn't work that way, but